So I want to take a look at the Electric Vehicle Council's State of Electric Vehicles in July 2023. This is a report that came out today, and I think it's worthwhile going through because there's a lot of facts and figures in here, which is really good to see. There's obviously been some people there, spent a fair bit of time preparing this. One of the important things that I think we need to touch on is just the absolute domination of Tesla in the market. I mean, these two vehicles alone make up a significant amount, and we'll have a look at those numbers in a second, followed by BYD, which has started to do good things. So if we continue along here, it basically mentions about, government strategy, etc., etc. And then this is a figure that surprised me. I didn't realise that we had as many as 800,000 buses and trucks, but when you think through, Australia's a big country. We move a lot of stuff around every day, a lot of people around. It kind of makes sense. While there's a few electric vehicles electric buses getting around, the vast majority of those are ICE, basically diesel trucks and buses getting around. So a lot of work to do there, and there's just not the availability of vehicle models like there is in the consumer space for even heavily motivated companies willing to spend a lot of money. The options are just not there. That they are, internationally, the automakers that produce these vehicles, they are working towards that and a number of offerings, but we're just not seeing enough of them in Australia. Moving down here, they're talking about fuel efficiency standards, which, basically, if we want to accelerate the transition, you've got these push and pull factors, right? So definitely what I'd love to see the most is more availability of markets and that competitive pressure on price to push that down and let that drive most of the adoption. But at some point, we're going to need to put the pressure on the people, the laggards that don't want to give up their ICE vehicles, and maybe introducing something like an efficiency standard means that automakers can't just continue to dump whatever vehicles that are not wanted elsewhere in the world into the Australian market. And even if they can find buyers for those, I think ultimately we as a country want to start to say this is the direction we want to go in. And we've done a little bit of that with vehicle incentives and subsidies at the state level. Nothing at the federal level really, other than maybe, I guess, the funding to ARENA. So they co-invest in some of the charging stations, or a lot of them actually. So there's that. But outside of it, there's not really a federal and then a state rebate, which we see in other parts of the world, to really bring down that upfront cost of electric vehicles. But yeah, at some point you gotta weigh up, okay, if all of the incentives are there, and let's imagine you walk into a dealership, not that I think that you will very much in the future, but let's say you do, that if you walk in and there's an EV there and a comparable ICE vehicle and they're the same price, I think you'd be absolutely crazy to go for the ICE vehicle, because the consumer demand is changing, right? So if you buy that ICE vehicle for whatever you pay today, let's say it's $50,000, if you think you're going to go and sell it for any reasonable price in 3 or 5 years from then, good luck, because the bottom is going to fall out of that market. Nobody's going to want that thing, and everybody will be trying to offload their vehicles. So there'll be a flood of those into the market. And so, the lower ongoings with an EV, the lower cost of servicing and charging versus refueling, that sort of stuff, dramatically different. I mean, it's really, we should think about recharging as like about a third to maybe half the cost of if you're going to fast charge, you might pay up to half of what you pay for fuel. But in my experience, I used to pay, say, $60 a fortnight for fuel. It wouldn't even be $20 in electricity, and depends on which power plan you go on then. And the other great thing is you do have a capacity to impact that as well. So if you're a homeowner, you can put solar on the roof and reduce that electricity bill even further. So if I keep going through, as I said, this is a long report. This is the team. You can go and have a look at that yourself if you want. Basically, the number of EVs sold, 46,000 out of the fleet that gets sold every year in Australia of more than 1 million. That's not a significant number. It's growing though. That's the important bit. So we're up to 8.4% of all new EVs sold this year, an increase of 121%. The 3.8% was basically the uptake last year, and that's grown to 8.4. Now, the other cool bit, and we'll get to this in a minute, is that month by month we're seeing this with the new vehicle sales. So Obviously, there's a whole fleet of vehicles out there on the road, and they'll last, somewhere the average expected usable life is around 12 years in Australia for a vehicle. And so, if a vehicle sold today, it's going to be on the road for, say, 2035 perhaps. So we really need to think about how fast we can adopt EVs, because the back end of that means we get closer and closer to 2050. And if we've still got vehicles on the road that are ICE vehicles, we're not going to be at net zero by 2050, which is kind of the whole point of all this. So Tesla and the Model Y account for 30% of all EVs. That's ridiculous for one model to account for that, because it's been a very, very long time since the likes of Ford and Holden have been selling in those quantities. Used to be, the story was you'd race on the weekend in supercars and then sell on the Monday if you had a win. So those days are well behind us. We've got one of the most diverse markets in Australia in terms of nameplates. A lot of different models, a lot of different choice for consumers. So to see one nameplate take 30% is kind of insane. And we also seen it be the second best selling vehicle in Australia in June. So I knew when I reviewed it and I wrote this that Australia was about to fall in love with that car. It's just a great mix of technology and space and storage and performance, and it's just, the price was the thing that everybody knocked. It's like, okay, well, I'm not used to spending $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 on a car, and that's still true today. But there are a lot of people that can buy in that price range, as evidenced by the sales. So the maths that I did basically was combine the Model Y, the Model 3, and you're getting close to 45 to 50% of the EV market in Australia from Tesla. So that's, the leadership charts of vehicle sales is just going to change so dramatically over the next 10 years, and we're already starting to see it now. And BYD 6,000, it's nothing to sneeze at. They've only got the Atto 3 in the market at the moment. The Dolphin is coming, so that's the sort of the Model 3 competitor. It'll be very interesting to see how that goes. The PHEVs, so they start to talk a little bit about hybrids. I think you'll be fairly crazy or fairly ambitious, I think, to buy a hybrid and think that you're going to get any kind of resale value on that in the years to come. Ultimately, everybody so hybrids basically they were a stopgap solution which fitted a window of time which was probably the last 5 years. And there's a sales graph in a minute that I'll show you that really sort of demonstrates this well, that I think we've kind of hit the peak of where hybrids are going to make it to, which will be overtaken by EVs, and hybrids just won't have a role to play as the range of EVs continues to increase, which it has just over the last couple of years. Then that range discussion really will fade away, and everybody will understand that EVs are a much better alternative. So instead of taking an ICE vehicle and adding an electric motor and drivetrain to that and battery, and making that thing twice as complex, and effectively then you're going to refuel and sometimes refuel and recharge, to shift that to basically be a simplified model. You get to reset on so many things. You get to free up all that extra space. You get to take out the complexity and the price associated with having those two systems in the same car. And we see the benefits of that. The ranges that we're getting from a dedicated EV versus, say, a retrofit on an existing vehicle platform are considerably different. So if we keep going with the charging story here, so 967 high power public chargers. Now, high power is kind of a weird way of phrasing that. I mean, they're classing 24 to 99. There's almost no 24 kilowatt DC fast charging. I mean, 50 and above is kind of where it's at. Most of them I've experienced are kind of about 120 to 150. And then, of course, the big Tritium and the ABB are 350, up to 350. So, yeah, the story there, 438 fast charger locations is really great. It's growing. Policy scorecard, don't really care. I mean, some states like Queensland has a $6,000 rebate. It's the best in the country. So that certainly lowers the upfront cost, makes it easy for people to get in, for people to get in. Wouldn't say easy, but easier to get into an EV. So if we look at this starts to be where that story is really told, that we are just taking off in terms of battery electric vehicles. So to think that just 3 years ago, or 2.5 really, 3 years ago, we were at less than a 1%, and now we're at 8.4. Now, extrapolate that out, where do you think that's going to end, right? And there's another great graph coming in a second. If we move down here, we've got the international comparisons. So Australia is lagging the global average. Surprise, surprise. Some historical policies and comments from important politicians probably didn't assist that. Thailand, you're kind of right on par with Thailand, but we're kind of, I think, a little bit more of a developed country than Thailand, so I would expect a little more from us. If we go and look at, I sort of put us in the same camp as the UK, we should be around that. They're way ahead of us. France are at 20%, we're less than 10%. So now look at the Norway. I mean, they are the absolute champions of this transition, and they're way out in front. So 90%, nobody's going to catch them. That is a phenomenal success story. And 10 years ago, they were almost nowhere as well. So, I mean, it's proof is in the pudding. That is possible with the right incentives and right motivating factors, and getting people on board with the transition is definitely possible. So we're not in a good spot compared to those countries ahead of us. Even China, who often are sort of spoken about as the big polluters of the world, they are well and truly on their transition to EVs. And maybe some of that's out of necessity because their air pollution in cities is to a point where that's really affecting human life. So they're on this transition. So if we go to here, this is another great example of what I was talking about in terms of the FEV or the hybrid solution. You can see that is sort of steady growth but pretty mild, whereas it's the hockey stick for EVs. And I would fully expect that this thing is not going to reach 40,000. It's going to taper out and taper off considerably as more and more people find the car that they're after, their next vehicle, in an EV. Again, another way to sort of highlight just the dominance of Tesla here, and then we move into the everybody else. It is great, I would say, that others are starting to put vehicles in the market that are competitive, that are inviting. One of the biggest struggles, like something like the Polestar 2, when I reviewed that, I loved it. And I said, if the Model 3 wasn't in the market, that would probably be the EV that I have in my garage right now. Really cool car, runs Android Automotive. I actually really enjoyed that. It's pretty powerful. The challenge there is just they can't secure enough of them, which is a good problem to have. But the rest of the world is doing this transition, as we've seen up earlier in the report. So we're really fighting these auto manufacturers to basically get supply here. And something like the Ioniq 5, there's been a number of vehicle releases that are batches of 500, right? So if Tesla's selling in the thousands and the others can't even get that supply to the market, well, they don't even have a hope of sort of matching them. So that means that Tesla's production is just at a point where they can fulfill the Chinese market and the Asian market. Obviously, our vehicles are coming from Shanghai now, as well as have enough to send to other markets like ours. And that's what the other guys need to do. They really need to ramp their production. So this is maybe not the best graph to show this, or chart, but it's I think this really demonstrates a transition. So you can see as we move through 2015 up through 2019, 20 and beyond, that the amount of FEVs are dying. So yeah, I imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I imagine many people who went out and bought the Mitsubishi. So let's see, Mitsubishi FEV. Is it the Outlander? Yeah, this was one of the most, if not the most popular hybrids for a while. I imagine many of those customers are now looked at the Model Y and transitioned over to there. Slightly different vehicle and different size, but if you're after something that can transport 5 adults, a Model Y will do the job for you on that. So just a comment from Empire of Peaches, love it. Seeing a few nice looking BYDs on the road. I agree, I've seen a few around Wodonga as well. And, it's almost like when you pass another EV, you kind of like give them the nod or the wave. Not everybody waves back or acknowledges it, but you kind of like, you feel like you're part of this thing that's happening, a movement that is like, you're doing the right thing, like you're not just ignoring facts and buying any kind of vehicle. And sure, there are great reasons why people still need to buy the vehicles that they do, but I think for those of us who have the capacity, you should look at the benefits and make a serious evaluation about what your next vehicle should be. I decided 5+ years ago that I knew my next vehicle was going to be EV, and I kept that vehicle longer. I had a 2005 Mitsubishi Lancer and effectively ran that for 15 years and drove it into the ground, basically. Its whole usable life, it was my car. I bought it brand new and then sold it and got the Model 3. So that was my dedication. So I used that time with that vehicle to basically save towards the goal. And sure, I would have liked to have upgraded in between to get to a newer car, but I knew that the money was better served going to an electric vehicle. And it was when I seen the Model 3 announced. Thought, okay, I'd driven the Model S and the X, and I thought, well, they're amazing cars. I love the EV and the benefits that come with that, but I'm never going to buy a car in that price point, right? That's serious money to buy those kind of cars. So the next question was, how was I going to afford it? Which is the same sort of thought process I think many of us went through. And then you go, well, if I prioritize this and save here, and you reorganize your finances and really dedicate it and make that a priority. I don't have a swimming pool in the backyard. I don't have a boat, all those kind of things. I don't go and gamble the money away. So if you dedicate your finances to that task, yes, it's a lot of money, and it was 2019 when I got the Model 3. But if you make it a priority, I think it can happen. So the good thing now, I guess, is now that we've been in the market a few years, that there are starting to be those people who are selling their vehicles, and there can be some great discounts. Like you could pick up a used Model 3 for 50 to 60 grand potentially. I mean, that's amazing value compared to what it was just a few years ago. Anyway, let's keep moving through the report, and touches on states and territories, a bit of a breakdown. This is really interesting because ACT is such a small state in terms of population. Like Victoria is now the most populous state, and actually, I wonder if Melbourne is. Let's do. If there's one thing I love to use LLMs for, it's these kind of fact checks. So, which state in Australia has the largest population? So I think Melbourne has the biggest population in a city, but state-wise, I think New South Wales is certainly bigger. Right, so New South Wales, let's see, Australia, largest population. So New South has 8.1, Victoria has 6.7, Queensland 5.2, WA, it doesn't list ACT, but they're further down the list. So, yeah. So, the city with the largest population in Sydney, where as of June, the most populous city. Interesting. I swear, didn't Melbourne overtake Sydney population? Yes, you are correct. Okay, so it just lied to me. That's great. I thought I remembered that. So Melbourne has a population of 4.8 and Sydney's is 4.8, but just slightly more. So yeah, there you go. So back to the story. Slightly distracted there. So it's pretty flat, to be honest. Like Queensland, South Australia, Tas, Vic, WA, and then the Australian average. ACT well out ahead. Talked about that enough. FEVs are not long for this world. Electric trucks. There are approximately 12 electric trucks currently available in Australia. Now, I think they're talking about mid-size city last mile delivery kind of stuff, not so much the prime movers and B-doubles and that sort of stuff. So I've written a few articles about the last mile delivery, so a few beer companies and that kind of thing that are distributing their goods. And that's basically like, we've got the manufacturing facility here, the distribution point here, maybe the retail over here, and they just do a circuit. So if the range all adds up and they've got a fast charger at their location, you're good to go, right? That model works. Buses, they've also got a set route, so they know exactly how far they're going to travel every day. Maybe there's some slight variances in that, but overall you're going to know the range required. And I think that transition is happening with buses. It's just about, if the bus company's invested in a bus, they're very unlikely to retire it ahead of its usable life. But they should be making those same considerations that I was talking about earlier, that thinking about their next vehicle purchase, that's the time where they might go, okay, let's try a couple. Honestly, I think the days of trialing it before you buy these, something we've seen a lot with councils and that kind of thing, that they'll buy a couple of EVs, try it out for a couple of years, and then they'll buy some more. I think you can kind of understand that, within some constraints, EVs work. And so the time to trial is kind of behind us now. I think it's time to buy and just get this transition done. In Victoria specifically, we have this, ambitious target to reduce our emissions, and that time frame continues to come sooner and sooner. So if we're going to meet that, transport is a big part of those emission reductions, and so it's got to happen sooner rather than later. Public charging, etc., in services 967. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but you can see the growth in charging, which absolutely does need to keep pace with vehicle adoption. If we hit a point where, it's a common consensus that, you can't find a place to charge, or there are big queues, we've seen at peak times like Christmas and Easter and those kind of things, where the amount of travel goes up considerably, that there can be choke points at main infrastructure. Wodonga is a great example of that, being between Melbourne and Sydney and Canberra. That somebody driving through here is a common route, that you can see some wait times during those peak periods. So how do you build against that? It's very hard, because you don't want to overbuild. You don't want to have 24 bays here in Wodonga, and for 50 of the 52 weeks that they're underutilized, because you're just never going to get the return on investment that you'd like. So on PlugShare, this is what I recommend anybody that is after a charge, considering buying an EV, got an EV, just head to PlugShare, and you can see that between 50 kilowatts and 350, the amount of locations that you can charge at now is crazy. Sure, there's still some gaps here. If I want to travel from South Australia over to Perth and drive, I might have an overnight stay here. I've never been on that tour. Some people have done it. Some people have travelled right around Australia in an EV to kind of prove that it's possible. I think that story is only going to get better and better over time. So, yeah, in Wodonga we've got a little one over here. So a town of 100,000, we've got the nice one out at Barney. And that probably doesn't get used as much as it should. But now we're sort of filling in places like Wangaratta, BP at Glenrowan's got one. Euroa's always been one of the bigger sort of stops, and Ampol along the way. So that journey between sort of Wodonga and Melbourne is one I've done a lot, and there's more than enough charging infrastructure. And then once you get to Melbourne, it's take your pick. And that's where you use this sort of the availability in your car as to whether, that particular spot is busy or not. I think Tesla does a really good job of showing that. And third-party networks, I think, need to do a little better in terms of dividing up the usage between them. So if they highlight, hey, this is a peak, it's got peak usage right now, and give you an alternate, that's sort of more around the charging experience in the car, I guess, or in the app itself, to just better manage the EV peaks and troughs. They can do that a little bit with flexible pricing as well, so incentivize people that want to charge. If you would charge, say, outside of, I don't know, what the daily, working hours, I guess, if you charge anywhere from sort of, 6 o'clock PM to 7 AM the next day, there'll be almost nobody at the chargers versus, charging during office hours. There's quite a lot. And you got to remember too, there'll be an uptake in vehicle fleets, and that means more travel during business hours that will also need charging. Hopefully those vehicles go back and charge, and those businesses put the charging infrastructure at site, and when the vehicle's not in use it can be charging. But there may also be a consequence that, hey, if I drive from here to Wagga and I want to charge up before I drive home from a meeting, then fast charging might be the answer too. All right, so this is sort of just demonstrating that there's a variance in the number of available fast chargers, 100k and up. They are more expensive, like considerably expensive to put in a 350 kilowatt charger. That's why most are opting for, say, 100, 120, 150, that kind of volume. With most of the Tesla superchargers being the 120 odd, there are some Gen 3 ones that are faster, 250 kilowatts out there. That's another map from PlugShare. This is actually a really good breakdown of the projects that are coming up. So each one of the state governments have kind of announced like a electric vehicle super charging highway. And this is a great example where it's like, hey, if you want to cut right down the middle of Australia, there is about to be a series of chargers that allows you to do that. And this route we looked at before from Adelaide over to Perth, and you get right up and around. So in not too long, the charging story is going to get a whole heap better. And not too long, I mean kind of the next 12 to 18 months is going to really change. All right, what else are we looking at? Destination charging. There is, a lot of funding as it suggests there. The vehicle program so far is 1.7, 20 million allocated. What I would say about destination charging is it's nice to have. I wouldn't rely on it. So you can, if you're booking accommodation, this is one of the cool things. If you're booking accommodation, there's often now a checkbox to say, do they have charging or not? And so we went and stayed our last family holiday. We went to Lakes Entrance, and the charging story there was okay. There was a couple of hotels or motels that had charging infrastructure, but they were not where we wanted to stay. So chose a different one, but I called them and made sure that they had a PowerPoint. It turned out that there was a pool shed right near the back of their car park, and that's where I parked, and they gave me that allocated reserve spot for the few nights or the best part of the week that we were there. So that was awesome. We were able to go out through the day and then charge up overnight, and it was only just took the mobile charger with me, and that was a really sort of great holiday and not an issue at all. And then when it came time to drive home, quite a decent drive, but we had more than enough range to get the first fast charger and then back. So yeah, that kind of worked out really well actually. And whether it's wineries or hotels or you name it, the amount of destination chargers is starting to grow. So it's not always about the fast charger, it's always about the amount of charge you can put in 24 hours. On the horizon, vehicle to grid. So something Tesla doesn't offer, but some of these other cars, a number of them actually do. So the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and a bunch more of them are starting to offer it. It's a cool feature. It's usually like vehicle to load rather than vehicle to grid. This introduced the discussion about like home batteries. And so we have solar, we don't have a battery yet. Battery's fairly expensive. There's a 75, 80 kilowatt hour battery in my car. There's another 75 kilowatt hour battery in my wife's car next to it, and that's a lot of energy that's stored there. And if it would only take one of us to be home and a blackout happen, that we wish that we could use that, and just Tesla doesn't support it right now. In those vehicles they never will. The infrastructure in the car is not there, but in future vehicles, who knows, maybe they do. But yeah, I've seen plenty of great shots of people working from home with a cable running from their car to their laptop and those kind of things. And they're continuing to work and get things done. So I like the concept of it, but ultimately I do think about the experience, the time when it comes inevitably if you did have a blackout. Let's say it's an extended blackout of say 3, 4, 5 hours. Your family's home, your car might be running the heater or cooler, it's running the fridge, the TV, life's good. And then you get a call and you got to go into work and you're like, sorry family, I'm going to turn off the power now. It's like, that doesn't sound amazing to me. I'd much rather have a battery dedicated to that task. It's just about the prices of those batteries coming down. Currently they're, prohibitively expensive, I would say. They're, $12,500 for a Powerwall 2 in Australia right now. At installation, you're talking about $15,000 investment. And if you... Sounds like family's getting home, so they might pop in a second. So unless you're like a really dedicated person, use a lot of energy, maybe that makes sense to you, but it takes a lot of power bills, especially given that we've got solar and those power bills have really reduced. It takes a lot of power bills to sort of pay that back. And so let's say the payback period is something like 10 years. Well, the battery's warranty is 10 years. There is one scenario that you can get out of that, which is if you enroll into a virtual power plant, Tesla increases the warranty by 5 years. So then you get a 15-year lifespan of the battery, while the payback period could be 10 years. So the solar is an easy story because your payback period is like 3 or 4 years, and they last for 20, 25 years in the panels, and maybe 10 years in the inverter. So that kind of goes together really well, that as long as you don't sell your house in that time, that you'll be well ahead by the end of that investment. And I honestly think that'll be one of the best investments that we ever made, was putting solar on the roof. If there's one regret that I have, is that we didn't put more. So we put a 6.5 kilowatt system on the roof, and with the addition of the EVs, 2 EVs in the garage, I think that we'll transition to gas appliances. I think we will continue to use power, but that's something that we can be in control of, invest, and then bring that cost down. Whereas our reliance on gas, like I have a $900 gas bill right now, being winter and the heater and the cooking and everything comes off that. There's zero that I can do about that. There's nothing I can do to reduce that gas bill. Look around at other plans, but that's sort of incrementally different. So the big move there is to transition to electric, and then maybe add some solar and battery to fix that problem. Anyway, so this gets back to the vehicle efficiency standard, and I also want to think through the per kilometre charging. So at the moment, most vehicles are taxed based on the fuel. So as you go and refuel, you'll pay a portion of that, a fairly big portion of that. Let's see what the fuel excise is. What is the fuel excise amount in Australia? I think it's like 40 cents per litre or something goes to this. Come on, bud. It's usually like fast as. Okay, wow. Is that real? Are they taking up to 50 cents in 2025? Holy crap. Okay. Indexed twice a year to CPI. I did not know that. Wow. So 44. It's gone up from 40 to 44, and it's on its way to 50. Good luck with that. So we're paying about $1.80. I think I seen the sign when I passed it today. I don't look very often, but today I did notice it. So, they're not going to take a cut on profits. So that's going to be an increase in fuel price. So at $1.80, that's going to go over $2 soon enough. That's another, maths is hard, another 15, 16 cents on top of what you're paying at the moment. That's going over $2 in the next couple of years. So, proposed efficiency targets for new passenger vehicles. So this is like how far you can get. So grams or kilometres in EDC. Catch up. I don't really understand that catch up bit, but okay. So cars have got to go further on less. Cool concept. And for light commercial and off-roads SUVs. So there's going to be a point where basically cars are not meeting the standard, and the internal combustion engines that we have today, often turbocharged, they're very evolved, right? They've been iterated over years and years and years and years, and every model release you get slightly more power and that sort of stuff, and maybe a bit more efficiency, but there's no big unlock or leaps and bounds kind of unlock that happens when you transition to EVs. So every day of the week, zero emissions will beat some emissions. So even if they're successful in yielding a little bit more performance, a little bit more range, it's not the answer. Not the answer. All right, so we've got some supplier side measures. in terms of helping EV adoption. So strengthen policy signals, vehicle manufacturers prioritising Australia. I'm not sure how much you can do to make that happen, other than making it cheaper to bring vehicles here. So the last figure that I heard, and I'm sure it's way more now, that to get your vehicle approved and go through all the safety checks and all of that approvals is about $1 million for somebody to put a vehicle in the market. So if you're thinking about, let's say the Atto 3 is like a, 50,000, let's say $50,000, right? And BYD are making, let's say it's 10,000. I don't think it's anywhere near that. It's probably 5, but let's say it's 10. Generously, it's 10. You've got to sell a lot of those vehicles to make up your $1 million to break even, right? And so if the government wants to incentivize them, what if they gave the vehicle manufacturers a discount? We subsidize that in some way and said, look, if you want to bring a new vehicle here, a new EV, it's going to be half that price. If you want to bring a new ICE vehicle here, it's going to be double that price, something like that. They can play around with those market sort of controls. Moving into here, so we just got more similar stuff, and then demand side. So governments have a range of policies and programs to gold standard incentive program. Now this is like the Electric Vehicle Council making these like suggestions, I guess. So upfront rebate of 0 interest loan of $3,000. Well, many states already have that. As I said, if you could combine a federal rebate and a state rebate, and you're at like, I don't know, say you're in Queensland, you get 6,000 at the state level and 3,000, like you reduce a vehicle by 10 grand. I mean, the amount of people that can go from affording let's say it's the cheaper EVs, a $40,000 car comes down to something near 30. I mean, now you're talking about mass adoption. If there's one biggest complaint I've heard that's the strongest thing I've heard is just the upfront cost. Now, some people take it on finance and then you don't necessarily have a big upfront, but not everybody does. So yeah, the cheaper it is, it's certainly cheaper to run, that's for damn sure. So light EV incentives across Australia. Wondering which incentives when purchasing a vehicle for $50,000. Okay. Goes through who's in power. Not sure that's particularly important because this changes over time. But let's have a look. Rebate, 0 interest loan. I mean, I don't mind that. Giving people a loan at 0 interest, that will help them too. For a period of time. Not the whole loan, obviously. Road user tax, this is a big question mark because it's not applied to the ICE vehicles yet. It's only hybrids and EVs at this stage. And then the rebate, as I mentioned, Queensland's got that big $6,000 one, and Victoria frustrates me to no end that they removed that $3,000 rebate. And there wasn't a good explanation. They didn't stand up in front of the cameras and explain why that is. Effectively, they just basically said, we can't afford it, we're kind of broke. They can't afford the Commonwealth Games, they can't afford a vehicle rebate. It's kind of sad, really. And then this negative $1,600 here, that's because Victoria are charging a road user tax, which is the zero levy. So let's say Vic Roads lev. So the only state that does this at this stage, the others have said once with further into the transition we'll go here, but at this stage Victoria is the only one. And then this is the table. So it's in the 23-24 year, we're now getting 2.8 cents per every kilometre that we travel. If you're a hybrid, then you get 2.3, and then nothing. So yay, we got $100 registration discount. Thanks very much, but we're going to pay way more than that in the road user charge. So that's really disappointing because that is also indexed and that will continue to go up every year. Anyways, let's keep going down here. So Fringe benefits tax, not something I've been able to take advantage of, so I haven't really delved into that too deeply, but this is a good story, that there's quite a lot of vehicles, eligible and available and that sort of stuff. The new ones, the MG4, really affordable. ZS EV, I've reviewed that in the past. It's a decent entry. It has compromises, but decent. Cooper Born, love the design of that thing. Looks fucking mint, but the price is not right. $60,000 for a small car is just too much. If that thing was like 45, I mean, that would sell like hotcakes. And then you could have your premium version at 60, sure, with a fancy paint, all that sort of stuff, but the starting price is too high on that for it to be seriously adopted. Marquee, we've talked about that being too much, let's say. And then Peugeot, they're all FEVs, so they're not really important. The Leaf, cool. Nobody thinks about the Leaf anymore, to be honest. Their biggest Achilles heel right now, and something they really need to rethink, is just the charging standards. So they're still on CHAdeMO while everybody else has moved to CCS2 as the standard here in Australia. Dedicated electric vehicle strategy. So Tasmania says they're the only ones without it. More policy stuff. I don't really get those scores, but cool. Okay, so here's the targets. This actually could be cool to go through. So ACT, the commitment to 100% fleet leases by zero emission vehicles where fit for purpose currently selected passenger vehicles includes 6 etc. New South, target 50% of EV procurement in New South Wales government fleet. Cool, by 2026, a few years away, increasing to 100 by 2030. That's awesome. That's awesome for a few reasons, but namely because the New South Wales government fleet has a lot of vehicles in, and let's try and find that out. How many vehicles? This will be cool if Bud can tell us what this is. $12,000 vehicles. That's awesome. So that's cool. And so what they do generally, can't speak explicitly about that, but generally what happens is they'll keep it for 3 years, or they'll hit a certain kilometre number, and they'll trade them in, and then that fills the second-hand market and brings the lower prices to those people who can't afford brand new cars. So that's an important strategy. South Australia, a commitment to transition to the vehicle fleet by 2030, fit for purpose. Basically, they're leaving room for, let's say you need a ute or something like that, and there are no EV utes. Well, they're sort of carving that out for that reason, which is good. Jacket, it's getting a bit cold in here. Tassie, plan to transition to the government fleet 100% by 2030. Cool. Victoria, zero emission vehicles transition to the fleet 2035. So we've got 5 extra years in Victoria, and this is where it doesn't make sense. So why, just because there's a river that runs between New South Wales and Victoria, would we not be committing to the same? That's crazy. Let's have a look at ask the same question in here. How many vehicles in the gov fleet? Come on, Bud, you're not fast today. Normally it's like very snappy. Alright, 22,000, 13,000 in the Victorian one, so we had just under that. It's interesting. Victoria, more cars in their fleet. There we go. Queensland, goal of transitioning, goal doesn't sound very confident, of transitioning eligible passenger vehicles in the government fleet, zero emissions by 2026. It's ambitious. It's good. Let's have a look at what their fleet is. So Emperor Picture says, I just got an induction stove and my last gas appliance is now hot water. Congratulations, that's awesome. That's where I want to go to. So stove first, probably, hot water system, and then heater in the roof. That'll be an interesting one. It won't be cheap to do those things. We might be talking about the best part of 10 grand to transition all that, but This is then we can lower the cost by investing a bit more in solar. So Queensland have generated 5,000. The government is committed to 5,000 vehicles by 2025, which is slightly different than what this policy says. So either Bard's wrong or they're wrong. I'm going to go with Bard is slightly off. Significant portion of the Q fleet. Righto, let's keep going. We're at page 40 of 74, so this is one hell of a report. We've been going for a little bit now. So, who supports a fuel efficiency standard? Well, federal is 50-50, so cool. Most of them do. Interesting. Who supports a sales target? Not many of them. Queensland, kind of. Wait, who are the survey response for this? State's interests shown in submission to the federal government consultation. Okay, interesting. Incentives, all government. Right, we already knew that. Has an eligibility criteria of 180,000. Cool. Right, so this is going to be the reason people identify upfront cost, operating cost. Incentives that promote the EV uptake. Governments need to facilitate the phasing out of older polluting vehicles in the national fleet. This will be essential to achieving. So this is less about the current state of EVs and a little bit more about their, the EV Council's objective, right? So fine, like I agree with most of it, but like it does need to be detailed that that's what this is, their ambition or what they'd like to see happen, rather than to be specifically about the current status. So this is a breakdown of charging, public regular charging, fast charging, workplace charging. I mean, by far, the majority of charging is going to happen at home, right? Sure, there are some places that, the city might not have car parks and that kind of thing. You have to find alternative things, or street parking is happening a little bit. Street charging is happening a little bit as well. Just because there's sort of small exceptions to the rule doesn't mean that we shouldn't proceed. There's ways forward, and people are pretty innovative and clever, and they're going to find ways around that stuff. So trucks are a major contributor to the emissions, but receive little government attention. Well, the way I feel about that is, unless there's really good products that can come to the market, like Volvo, Mercedes, and a bunch of them are producing electric trucks, we've got to get them into the market, and then the trucking companies at least have a chance to buy them, and then they're going to start to set these targets about transitioning their fleet. Like, they are all about the dollars in the trucking industry, right? So if you can reduce their costs in any way, shape, or form, it's super competitive as well. So like to win contracts, like if you've got a lower cost base than your competitor because you've upgraded to EV trucks, and that means your ongoings are so much less. Even if the upfront cost was a little higher, you'll pay back that truck fairly quickly. If the upfront is higher but your ongoings are lower, the delta will be made up faster because of the volume of kilometers that you're doing. So the amount of goods every day, every week, that payback period will be a better story, I think, than even passenger vehicles, to be honest. Now, it depends, because I haven't seen the figures on an electric truck, but let's say a normal truck is $500,000 and an EV truck is $750,000. That sounds an enormous increase, but maybe when you do the sums, that works out, because instead of going a fuel up and you're putting $3,000 worth of diesel in the thing, you're recharging and it's costing you $200. I don't know, like some kind of massive delta like that, and then the serviceability as well. The downtime for truck can be considerable. You're still going to have tyres. There's no getting around that sort of ongoing cost. If you're doing that many Ks, you're going to wear out the rubber. So industry development, this is all getting kind of a bit boring, but down into here, effective data sharing is vital to policy decision making. One key issue is the lack of independent public source and the number of electric vehicles in the country. Public, cool. I would say too, just the EV charging companies, they should do a better job at sharing their charging session data, so that should help the government plan, or at least work with the charging companies to plan where, like, if you just leave it up to the commercial sense, what they will do is everybody will try and put their charger right in the hub of a population, dense area or a tourist destination area, and forget about the lesser visited areas. Well, it's almost like telecommunication. Like, you can't just go and install 4G in the city and think about and then forget about the people in regional areas and rural or remote areas. This is going to be infrastructure that the whole country needs. And so, if I travel home to a small country town, I want charging there. If I travel to the big city, I want charging there. It's like, it just needs to have charging options everywhere. So other EV policies, Australian government has been committed to net zero emissions in 2050, which is what I mentioned earlier. That's what this whole thing is about. Like, if we're going to hit that, we've got to have this in check by 2035. So ACT, so ensuring transport sector does its fair share of achieving climate objectives. The ACT government's plan is to phase out the internal combustion engine and light vehicle sales by 2035. Right. So we're here in 2023. Okay, so here's the point. So in 2023, we have 8.8% of new vehicle sales being EVs. Do we honestly think in the next 10 years that 8.8% is not going to become 16%, 32%, 64%, and just keep doubling every couple of years? And that in 10 years' time, that we're not going to go from like 8 now to probably 80% of vehicles. So that puts us in, 2033, and we're at 80 to 90% of EVs. So then by 2035, the amount of people who's going to want an ICE vehicle, because remember, it's going to be more expensive than an EV by then. It's probably not going to go as far. It's certainly not going to be as powerful. And, it's, I don't know. It just doesn't. I find it incredibly hard, I guess, to imagine a scenario where the vast, vast majority of people are not absolutely willing to buy EVs in 2035. And the other thing that will happen, I guess, is less people use petrol stations and fuel, then inevitably supply demand dictates that the price of that is going to go up. So imagine that fuel is not $2 a litre, and it's not even like the Christmas and Easter kind of premiums that you pay when maybe it's $2.20, $2.30, something like that. Imagine it's $5 to go up, $5 a litre to go and fuel up. You tell me how many people are going to really want to, go and drive around their ICE vehicle. Even if they're like the hardest of diehards, I just can't see that that's a viable thing in 2035, that you're still buying an ICE vehicle. If you've got all the money in the world, good luck to you. Maybe you can, but I think it's going to be rare. So this is the final, getting towards the final summary of what is going to make the difference here. In line with achieving the net zero by 2050, commitments to sustainability. 100% of new light vehicles produced. Local governments play a crucial role. Hello.
Hey.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm good.
I'm streaming at the moment, darling.
Dad.
Yeah? What can I do?
So, before Emmy was barking at Mama and biting her clothes.
Oh, dear.
And just before she was biting my sock and jumping up on me.
Okay. Well, you tell her no, okay?
I said no, so she just barked at Mama.
Okay. All right. I'll come out in a minute, okay? All right. Love you. All right. So let's keep going. This is really interesting. So they're proposing, because this thing started out as a report on the current situation, but this is clearly talking about future state now. So 100% of new light vehicles purchased by councils being EVs by 28. That's in 5 years. And then 100% of the council's light fleet being electric by 2033. That means in 10 years, they actually want them to have fully transitioned. Now, as I said, they usually cycle them out after 3 to 5 years on a certain amount of Ks, 30, 50,000 Ks. So maybe this will happen anyway, but this is an interesting proposal that's what they think you have to set to achieve it. I'm sure that's going to ruffle some feathers to think that those two timelines are pretty aggressive. That's good. Heavy vehicles. Being 100% of new heavy vehicles being purchased by the councils being EVs by 2040. Okay, so they're giving them a bit more timeline on the heavy vehicle bit, because who knows whether it's hydrogen or something, I don't know. Yeah, I guess they're sort of including that in the EV bit, but 100% of council's electric vehicle fleet being the fleet being electric by 2050. So that's obviously, if you meet these two, then you're well on your way to this one. Support national EV charging infrastructure targets, multi-bay fast charging every 70 kilometres along highways. So I think we would be, based on the plug share map that I showed before, I think that we would be every, what's the distance? Like, let's say between sort of Wodonga and Melbourne, and you route through here through Euroa, this distance probably here between here, Euroa and Glenrowan, is probably, let's do the calculation. Let's say so right now, the longest distance, this is in July 23. We're talking about 68 at the moment. Now, do I want to get off the freeway and go into Glenrowan? Probably not. But you could. So what they're trying to say is, not just that distance there, but all of the infrastructure. Like maybe there are parts in between, Sydney to Queensland, all the major highways that you would be. Every 70 kilometres you have fast charging, and then every 5Ks in urban, which is, it's going to get to the point where I think shopping malls, service stations are going to transition. There's just going to be a lot of charging options, I think, which is going to be great. And who can, I think there's going to be price wars too, to be honest. Like, not everyone's going to charge the same. And so you might think, well, I could go to Woolworths and charge my car and I'll, pay X at Coles, and then I'll, compare that with what I pay at Woolworths and that kind of thing. And so, yes, the groceries might be XYZ cost, but the charging is cheaper, and maybe that's a deal. A bit like you'll get 5 cents off your fuel or whatever. They'll throw the same discounts off, 5 cents off your charging, that kind of thing. Region-specific targets, adoption, non-car transport, community choice, micro-mobility, 25%. So, obviously, electric scooters and that kind of thing might play a role in the future electric bikes. Number 2, incentivizing the adoption of electric vehicles. Here are some things. Consider opportunities to incentivize future development, lower emission zones. So that would be like, hey, unless you're in if you draw, some of the cities overseas do this already, that they draw a zone around the center of the city, and they say, hey, unless you've got like an EV or a low emission vehicle, you can't get in there. Or if you do, then you pay a sort of an exorbitant tax. So it really disincentivize people from driving their ICE vehicles in there. What I will say is I kind of got a quick eye into the future, I guess, when we had our honeymoon at Hamilton Island, and they don't really have anything sort of other than electric golf buggies to get around in. And so that was really cool, and then it was like super quiet, and everyone's buzzing around in their electric golf buggies versus combustion vehicles, and the sound and emissions and stuff, it was noticeable. It was a really cool place to be, and if our city centres turned into that, it'd be a nice place to live. Enabling EVs in car sharing fleets, well, that's already happening. Procurement policies that preference external contractors transition to EVs. Now I don't know that you can really do that. Like, if you're using an external contractor, can you really say what vehicles that they use? I guess you can if you're government, but it's a bit of a stretch, that one for me. Future-proofing the build environment for EVs. future-proofing the build environment. That's a terrible sentence, but in line with the EV readiness and provisions of National Construction Code, incorporate EV charging as a requirement, right? So we just seen this week, like Victoria ban new houses from 24 can't have gas connections, right? So it's definitely possible that states go down this route and say, hey, if you're building a new home, you're going to put an EV charger in, or certainly if you're building like an apartment building with a block of, with some garages underneath, there's going to be some charging infrastructure. So you can avoid the future battles about can we get it installed or not. It would just be in there by default. If you're building a car park, like a parking garage, then certainly I'd expect that to at some stage come into the building regs. That's part of your infrastructure. Enabling the rollout of charging infrastructure, offer land at no cost, long-term leases. Well, that'd be a cool thing to do. I mean, they need to go somewhere. It could be a revenue generator for the government, to be honest. Like if you've got this land and the charging companies or infrastructure, the charging networks want to put their charging in, you might give them a break on it to put it in, but you could pick up 1 cent in every charging session, 1 cent in every cent per kilometre. So let's say you charge 40 cents per kilowatt hour. That 1 cent of that goes to the landowner, for example. And so that would be ongoing revenue for the life of that charging location. So I don't know that it necessarily needs to be no cost. I mean, I think there could be some. But yeah, big win-win. Here locally, we had the charging infrastructure. Tesla worked with the local council to get 6 bay supercharger. This is back in 2015-16. And that's worked really well. It's a great central location, short walk to the shops, that kind of thing. And I think those kind of arrangements can work really well. A fleet transition plan to 100% EVs across councils. So we touched on that before. So transitioning the fleet. Now, I actually think there's one that's kind of missing here. Like this is maybe what the government could mandate. But I think there needs to be a lot of work done in terms of incentivizing businesses and promoting to businesses the benefits of doing this. One thing that I really like about having an EV, a new modern digital EV, is that the key is the phone, right? So, there's no remembering the keys, and if you were switching a car between employees, you wouldn't have to worry about physical keys. You just like send them a key via email and they go and jump in the car and drive away. So for me, that's actually like a nice convenient factor, and they could maybe monitor the amount of charge in the car and that kind of thing, or turn the heating on early, and lots of fun stuff you can do when you've got a digital connected car. Promoting shared mobility. It doesn't touch on robo-taxis or anything like that, but it's certainly it's going to impact and be part of rideshare for sure. We see like Uber give incentives to those drivers who want to drive EVs. They give more of a cut of the revenue and those kind of incentives, which is really good. But ultimately, I want to see autonomy here and robo-taxi stuff. But in the meantime, some dedicated footpaths and that kind of thing, or bike paths for electric bikes or electric scooters, those kind of things, rather than just ban them. Let's look at how we can support them. Increasing awareness of electric vehicles is definitely part of the transition. I'm surprised this is number 7, to be honest. Getting the information into the hands of the people that don't know the EV story yet is probably the most critical. So it's cool that if you're talking to your family that and you own an EV and like maybe part of this is really like if you use an EV at work, then you go home and you tell your family and friends about your experience, and hopefully that's a good story to tell, and then they start to think about an EV as their next vehicle kind of thing. That word of mouth is really strong. And I will know that Tesla recently returned their referral program as well. So that word of mouth is we know this is true of social, but certainly that just spreads like wildfire when you... And the recommendations, there's great data about, how effective an ad is versus like word of mouth. And, if it comes from a trusted source, you're much, much, much more likely to believe it and act on it than a banner ad, for example. So increasing not only the knowledge about EVs and their benefits, but also as the prices come down and they become more affordable, dealing with that perception that like, yeah, EVs are great, but they're like for the rich. I think that story needs to change, and people need to understand that there are these, $40,000, which will soon be $30,000 cars, and the cheaper ride share as well. So if autonomy does happen the way that we think it will, then the cost of riding each kilometre will be dramatically less than it is today, which overall helps everybody at every price point. So explanation of policy and assessment metrics. This is sort of just behind the scenes details, I think. I'm not sure that I need to go through each one of these. These are more like definitions for the stuff that we've just read. And it goes on. And then electric vehicle sales. So this is a history. And they started tracking it from 2011, where there were just 49 EV sales. 0.0% of market share. And now we're at 8.4. That's cool. You know what's really cool is I think we can do this. Take this data, project when EVs at 80. Project what percentage EVs will be at in 2030. Now, this is where like LLMs can do their work. So it should understand that the data set that I just fed it, and then go, okay, I see this trend, and what I don't want it to do is like a linear calculation to say it's just 3.8% last year and then 8.4, and then like do the, okay, well then it's going to be this. It should take into account an exponential. So it's suggesting. That's really cool. Okay, so here's the prediction. 23 is, so year to date is 8.4. It's actually projecting that by the end of 23, that we're 11%, which is around 70,000 vehicles, 14%, 14.2 by the end of 24, 18.3% by the end of 25, 2026 by the end of 23.4, 23.4 by the end of 26, 28.5 by the end of 27, 33.6 by the end of 28, 38. That's interesting how it goes 33 to 38. 38 in 29, and then 43 by 2030. So if I say now, give me a graph. Hopefully it'll draw me a graph. Now, see the assumption that it has there? It's like this projection is based on an assumption that EV market growth will grow at a steady pace. Well, I don't think it's growing at a steady pace. I think it will grow at an exponential growth. Let's do this again. So make the calculation again. So it's 43.8 in 2030, and I'll be interested to see what it thinks. Oh yeah. Oh, we're going to be at 437% by 2030. Okay, it went bananas. So no, basically no, it's not going to do that. If you've got a guess, let's throw that in the comment or reply to me on X, and we'll see what you think the EV market share is going to be in 2030 in Australia, and we'll see who's right. I'm going to guess if we need to be done by like 2036, let's say 100% in 2036, we're going to be at 80% 75% by 2030. Yeah, I think that's a decent bet. 75% of new car sales by 2030. It's ambitious. I think it'll take a lot to get there, but it's also 7 years away. So cool. And so this is maybe the best set of data that I love. It's just listed out the price points of all these cars. Straight away, you're like, Audi? No. So the amount of people that are willing to buy a car over $100,000, very tiny. Very, very tiny. Like, let's say 1%. Maybe it's 2, but 1%. BMW, same thing. Okay, they've got one that's like half reasonable in price, and you've got to weigh this up with range. Some people care about acceleration. I do a lot. But let's say acceleration wasn't your aim. Let's say range and price was. That you've got Atto 3 coming in at 44, the Dolphin coming in at 44. So basically take your pick whether you want a SUV or whether you want a sedan. The cheapest one, the Dynamic, is 38. This is before on roads, obviously. So add GST and, well, stamp duty, registration, delivery, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But yeah, the range is 427. It's getting up there. It's very decent. 511 for the Cupra. It's pretty good. All right, so let's go through the... Wow, okay. So it's a FEV, right? So it's got a plug on it, so I guess that's why it gets included in the list. But I would easily delete these from the record because, yeah, well, okay. You've done very well in life if you can afford that. Good luck to you. Actually, I went to the launch. This funny, weird story, but I went to the launch of the SF90. Very cool, very Ferrari-looking car, but it's not very practical. So the Aura is a newer brand and model in Australia. That's at 44.5 before on roads. It's got lower end of the range, but that's fine. Onyx 6, I don't love the rear end of that, but it starts around 74, which is not bad, and 614 in range is very, very good. The Kona's been in the market for quite a while. They're sort of doing what they're doing. 300 k's of range and 60 grand is quite a bit of an ask. Jeep with their I-Pace is just, they're in another world. I don't understand how they think they're going to sell people on that. I mean, I think they sell 2 or 3 of them a month. It's ridiculous. I reviewed this EV400 SE like many years, 5 years ago or something. It's just bonkers. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's got a 90 kilowatt pack. That's probably part of the price, but it's slower than my Model 3. It's way more expensive. So that doesn't go together for me. Kia EV6, really nice looking car. You can get it in 3.5 seconds to 100. 100 grand. That's a pretty compelling offering. Not bad. They just don't ship enough of them here. And I've actually seen a couple around town. So starting at 72, that's pretty good. And 528, very cool indeed. LDV people mover. If you need a van, it's good that there's sort of one in the market. It's not sexy at all, but it is doing its thing. And then Mercedes, again, they've got like a little tiny EQA at 78, but ultimately most of these are big money that nobody's ever going to buy. So, and then they've got FEVs still in here, which is silly. Somebody like Mercedes should be leading the charge. MG ZSEV, I reviewed this as well, the earlier version of that, but it was the sort of the price darling, but now it's got beat out. I'm not sure. I haven't driven the Z4. Maybe I would choose like the Atto 3, probably the Atto 3 over that. All right, so where do we get to? MG Mini. You don't see Minis around. I mean, they're on sale, but certainly don't see many of them around. So they're doing small numbers, obviously. And then the Leaf, yeah, it's just not enough range there, and just it's not a nice design. I don't think it appeals to enough people, and it's got that weird Chatamo, which is now we're starting to see a lot of fast chargers go dual CCS too, and that means that those people who choose a Leaf with Chatamo connector are going to be in a world of hurt pretty soon, I think. Polestar 2, the range is decent. The price is sort of around the right mark. I would like to see them knock off a little bit. When you start to add their sort of, not autonomy, but their advanced driver assist stuff, it does bump this up to 5-6 grand more. and then that starts to be a bit of an ask compared to a Model 3 with autopilot. Porsche, look, they're nice cars, but nobody's buying this, really, not in any serious numbers. They're too much. And then Model 3 starting at 60. I mean, 60 for 490Ks or 75 for 602. Get after it. Model Y, it's just doing good things, and it's because of this, right? 72 grand, 455. It's an LFP pack, so you can charge to 100 as much as you like. 6.9, it's like, it's not going to set the world on fire. It's not certainly a long way from the Performance 3. Performance Y, if you can afford it, that's 3.7, still pretty tidy. But yeah, this is what's doing it. Good numbers, good range, great tech, love it. Volvo, I don't see anybody, fighting ham over fist to get a Volvo. Kia EV9, that could be a real player. I think the numbers are not going to make sense. I mean, I've seen 130 grand, so that's going to kill it dead on arrival if it's 130. It does look cool, the design. Whoever's the designer at Kia, crushing it. Looks amazing. But the finance people there need to tidy it up a lot. No range on the standard range there. 541 for the long range, which is maybe not long, but for a big SUV, that's pretty decent. They've thrown in a 100 kilowatt pack, which is huge. Tells you a little bit about the aero efficiency. Is not great. Lotus, I don't know. I've never seen any of those. Maserati, still not out yet, so to be confirmed. Peugeot, to be confirmed. Polestar 3, so not out yet, but 132, good luck. Yeah. Renault, small car, to be confirmed, not out yet. I think that they're like the Cupra Born, there is a good slot for hot hatches to do good things, but they've got to be priced properly. Rolls-Royce Spectre, okay, if you've got 770 grand, I'll take a ride in it, but that's a silly number. Skoda, I think they're a cool brand. A couple of people I know have Skodas, and they are quite a cool car. They're ICE versions anyway, so I think they should, design-wise, they should be able to do compelling products. We'll wait and see. But 77 kilowatt hour pack to get 550, 544 kilometers of range. I think they're good numbers. This is the column that matters, though, the price. Toyota, it's an ugly car. Nobody's buying it, and it's going to cost too much when it comes out. Very likely, 315 kilometers of range is not where it needs to be. ID345, we haven't seen them in Australia yet. They're big over in America and Europe. I hope that they do come. It sounds like they are if they're on this list, which is good. Putting up some decent range figures. Golf is fair. They can go away. Volvos, hey, so there's cargo vans and that sort of stuff. Cool. It's great that they're coming, because we do have people. Look, if you're somebody who ships flowers and whatever else, if that's your deal, then last mile delivery, that's you. That's great. Maybe Australia Post goes and buys a ton of them. I don't know. That's good. There's some fringe brands, like just ones that are making EVs, which is good to see. LDV ET60. It's the Australia's first electric ute. It's 90 something grand, and they've sold like 3 of them. So overpriced for what it is, especially the range. We need something like the Rivian. We need, I won't say it, but something like the Cybertruck in terms of the specs of that. Design, very controversial, not everybody's bag, but I think there's a long story to tell in terms of electric utes. And in terms of our vehicle sales in Australia, utes are responsible for a significant amount of them. So I think utes just have to come to market in Australia very quickly for the transition to start to happen. And a lot of those fleet vehicles that we talked about earlier in government divisions and that sort of stuff, that they are off-road vehicles a lot of the time, so they need that style of vehicle before they could really entertain upgrading to an EV. And we're kind of nearly at the end now. We're at EV trucks, and you can see a lot of coming soon. There's a few available now, but these are not big stories to tell. It is awesome to see quite a diverse range, although some of them, like the Janus, is a retrofit, which is they are going to get absolutely slaughtered once the real dedicated EV trucks come into the market in a serious way. You just can't make a traditional drivetrain work. The distribution of batteries and things like that just don't go together. So good luck, but I think they'll be challenged. Now this surprises me, just the sheer amount of buses. I kind of wasn't expecting that. I knew like BYD. When we're talking about full-size 70-seat buses, like that's cool. And ranges of 350, like they don't do anywhere near that per day. Now some of these bigger ranges are going to be important for your coach style touristy kind of traveling. If you want to go from, I don't know, Melbourne to Sydney or something, then you'll be putting on a few Ks per day, which is really good. Good if they're EV Ks, I guess. So electric 2-wheels and 3-wheelers. Wow. Okay, so now we're into bikes and stuff. Savic is a brand that I've covered a little bit in the past. Don't really recognise a heap of those, other than there'll be like Harley Davidson and stuff as well. So that, my friends, is 74 pages of the Electric Vehicle Council's report. We covered a lot of bases. It's a cool read. I hope you've enjoyed this. And I think I'll wrap up there. If you are interested in using my referral code, I can happily supply it. If you want to buy a Tesla, if you want to buy something else, go for it. Just buy a damn EV. Bye.